of the 8 billion people on the planet, only 0.0000015% have the privilege of making an MLB 40-man roster. And therefore, a lot of children, when they start dreaming of being a baseball player, when they grow up, are shot down. They're told they'll never make it. Stop wasting your time. However, what these people don't realize is that you can work in the baseball industry and not be on an MLB roster. And today we have the privilege of talking to one of the people who executed this at the highest level. You know him as Tosh from Momentum. Ladies and gentlemen, Tosh Semlacher. Alright, thank you so much for coming out. And obviously, you've made a career in the baseball industry. And out of the 8 billion people on Earth, only 0.0000015% actually make it onto an MLB 40-man roster. And therefore, a bunch of kids are discouraged from chasing their dreams, from trying to go after the dream of playing in the MLB. And they're told, don't even try, it's a waste of time. And what these people don't realize is that you can make a career in the baseball industry without being on an MLB roster. So tell us about your journey. At what point did you realize that that's what you were going to do? And obviously tell us about starting up with Momentum.
Yeah, so baseball has been a part of my life for a long time, but it wasn't really the focal point of my life until college. I played every sport growing up. I was a basketball player predominantly, and then in high school, I was a track athlete. And in many ways, I thought that track was actually going to be what I was going to do in college. But then I had a bit of a shift change in my mind. I had a few people kind of support me in my pursuit of a baseball career. With that goal in mind, they felt that I had far more potential and potential earnings, potential in general, if I pursued a future in baseball. So with that, I decided to shift where I was going to go to school. And I went to a smaller school in Oregon and played baseball right away. And that really, it was the interactions and the engagements during that time while I was building my, say, brand as a baseball player that really set me up for years past after my career might end. So college came and went. I was able to build myself up from an absolute nobody to somebody who had an agent. I had spoken with all the different teams, gone to pre-draft workouts. And then as many other stories occur, I got hurt in a time that wasn't great. And in many ways, I can definitely state that I'm a persistent person, and it's very difficult to sway me from something that I'm very passionate about and want to achieve. So I pursued baseball again for the next 2 years after that, trying to get back. I went and got shoulder surgery, tried to come back as a pitcher after I wasn't really able to pass any physicals with my left shoulder being as bad as it was. And then with that, I really started to, once that career path started to become less of a possibility, I did go through quite a transition phase where I didn't know what I wanted to do. I had studied business. I had studied a few different things. I thought about joining the military. These were things that I was just kind of passionate about at the time and always have been passionate about. But then I was offered a job at Driveline Baseball as a throwing trainer. And that really cemented the next path for me. I ended up being there in 2016, and I was one of the first employees in the new space there. Learned a lot about the game. That's where I met a lot of my future business partners like Trevor Bauer and Eric Sim. I went back to school and got my MBA at Seattle U, which I now sit as the chair of the advisory board for that program. And that really set me on a path of knowing like, hey, I don't have to make money using my body for baseball anymore. Maybe I can start using my brain and all the other things that I've been able to develop. So that was a nice part. I did have a lot of people knowing me from my playing days, and that kind of gives me credibility. But then I was able to accomplish some pretty cool stuff on the business side of baseball. So that's really it. If you have a passion for the game, and if you have a goal in mind of being in it, there are plenty of opportunities to be involved in the game after that. And that's really how, going from Driveline to Momentum and building the entertainment piece that we were able to build for the last 5 years. And then now in my new position as a director of corporate partnerships here with an affiliated baseball team in Spokane, I'm really able to see the whole landscape from outside of affiliated baseball, inside of affiliated baseball, player development, entertainment. I really feel like I'm been able to develop a very holistic view of, the game of baseball as a whole. So long-winded way of answering your question. There are so many ways to stay involved in the game of baseball. The number one is finding the avenues that you're the most passionate about, because that ultimately is what's going to keep you going when things are tough. And it also is what makes it not feel like a job.
So you mentioned your view of the game of baseball,
Yep.
and well, baseball is far from a dying sport. Over recent years, it's taken a bit of a backseat to the NFL, the NBA. World Series viewership really peaked in the 70s and 80s and isn't the same anymore. Why do you think, as somebody who works in the baseball entertainment industry, why do you think that is? And what do you think can be done to kind of regain baseball title as America's pastime?
Um, Accessibility is a big one. Making the players feel. This is one thing when you're on YouTube space, people feel like they know you because they get to see you day over day over day in very organic and very consistent means and mediums. Um, and I think that's one thing where there's this separation between fan and player in MLB that makes it, and it's been calculated that way where, there's specific media training that you go to as soon as you sign a professional contract. There's things that they teach you to do, teach you not to do. And those are a lot of the things that we started trying to think of, like, how do we try to engage with baseball fans in a more authentic and fun way? And that really was one of the main inspirations for Momentum, was how do we just make baseball fun? And then as time went on, it was like, just do cool shit. That was really like the end goal. And I think that's kind of, I would say the last 2 or so years, MLB has gotten far better at representing its players and highlighting its best players. I mean, when you have a guy like Shohei Ohtani, it's very difficult to not do that. Personally, I think the guy is a unicorn, and you need to promote him as much as he deserves. But there's also so many other players that they've been able to highlight. The Jazz Chisholms, the Fernando Tatises. I'm a big Mike Trout fan, but of course with him, the way that they presented him was very much in the old light of how you wanted to present your star baseball players, like Derek Jeters of the past. Like, this is America's pastime, very professional, just straightforward. Personality-wise, they didn't get to highlight them too much. Now you're starting to see a lot of these guys that have personalities, and a lot of them don't damper it. They boost into them. And I think that's where you're really starting to show who their players are, and then that gives an extra layer of personality to the teams. Then you're able to engage and identify with the different teams in a far better way than you were in the past. The old concepts for football were the steel curtain, which was a Pittsburgh Steelers defensive line and their defense. You felt connected to their defense through that, and that built an identity for the team. The Killer Bees, which was an outfielding trio. There's a lot of different ways. You could even look at it with some of the teams now. The Padres have Merrill, Fernando Tatis, Manny Machado. They have this core group of guys that are very personality driven, and they're not afraid to show it. And that's what's going to lend a lot of new fans going the Padres direction. Or I will say this: young guys that are coming up through the draft, they are not afraid to show their personalities. And that's a huge win for every baseball fan.
Well, I was going to save this question for later, but after you brought up the personalities of the players, obvious example is your friend Trevor Bauer, who had all those different issues with the different accusations, but it seemed to be cleared out, but still he's not getting any offers. He's not getting another opportunity. And just from looking around, it seems to me that that's a result of the amount of personality that he did show when he was with the Reds and with the Guardians. Do you think that showing personality could come back to bite these players? Do you think players are afraid to show personality because the league is, against fun at times?
Progression is difficult and evolution is difficult. And I think there's a saying where the first ones through the door are usually bloody. The first people that really show and try before something becomes commonplace, it's a risk, and it's a lot of risks that people are willing to take. Allen Iverson in the NBA was a perfect example. I'm assuming you might be too young for that one, but that was like one of the biggest guys when I was growing up. Like the NBA did not like what he was doing, but 20 years later, the NBA loves what he was doing. And I think that's exactly where baseball is now, is that it's gone through this 10, 15-year process of trying to figure out what's good for the game and what's bad for the game, what was against tradition and what should be the new tradition. And I think they're starting to see where the merit comes. So I would say there's been quite a few different people who have probably pushed the agenda more for power of the players' personalities, being allowed to, truly represent themselves on the field. And I think those people, as you have alluded to, are definitely should be credited for some of that stuff as time goes on. There's definitely been a lot of them, and I think there's a lot of guys that are meriting off of that freedom now. So I think it's in a good place. I don't think guys feel as afraid anymore. I think there's better guidelines, there's better examples, and there's far better understanding of the value of doing that now versus before, over the last 10, 15 years, where it was just considered just play the game,
So if the game's progressing, we've seen a interesting progression in spring training with the ABS system, and already only a couple of weeks into the season, we've already seen a handful of games be impacted, the results be impacted by poor calls. It's not the umpire's fault. Calling balls and strikes is very difficult. Do you think that the potential implementation of an ABS system or challenge system would be good for the game of baseball?
Yes, I do. Just like anything, I think this is during my time at Driveline Baseball, during the time where it just lends extra context and color to whether or not, it gives me power to choose whether or not I really want to stand behind this decision. I've been thrown out of baseball games where I disagreed on a strike call. Was I right? Yes. Was I able to challenge it? No. But I very well could have challenged it in the future. It's the same thing with, like football challenges. It's very commonplace now where a coach can choose to throw his challenge flag, and he only has a few choices when he can do it. He has to decide whether or not it's the correct one. And if it's wrong, he gets penalized for it, meaning he can't challenge again. And if he's right, he gets to try it again. That's very much how I see this, is you have the ability to, as a player, stand behind whether or not that's a case, or as a coach supporting your player, you can decide whether or not it's the right time. It just adds another strategic piece. And I think it does have a data side to it that's very valuable.
I like the strategic side, but comparing it to football is a bit difficult because in football, you don't have that whole art of framing, where framing a pitch has become a real part of the game. You have catchers making livings off of framing. So it takes a big part away from the game. It's not
Not
like in the
necessarily.
NFL where
When you are limited with how many challenges you can make, the art of framing is still very valuable, because if it's something that you have to be completely confident that you are right when you make the challenge. And so if the guy, the Giants catcher right now, fantastic. I think it's Bailey. Yeah, fantastic frame. I think the art of catching has developed so much in the last 5 to 10 years, and I'm lucky enough to know a lot of the guys who have driven that. There's Tanner Swanson with the Yankees. There's a guy named Kyle Sutherland now with the Cubs. There's a lot of different guys, Max Garrett with the Marlins, who have helped develop catching and the ability to really receive balls to fool hitters. And that doesn't change just because you get 1 or 2 challenges for an at-bat or for a game. You're able to challenge when you feel confident. I've seen certain times where a guy is like, no, I'm not confident enough to challenge it because the frame job is so strong. So I still think that is something, and it does fool the umpires, and they get things wrong, they get things right. So I agree that there are nuances to baseball that make it, it makes it a point of polarization and conversation. But from a strategy of how do you make control come back to the hitter as someone who you don't have much control at all, it is a nice advantage to be able, like, no, you're wrong, and then give it back. I think if you were to ask most catchers, sure, the Patrick Baileys of the world, who are just the 0.001% of their profession that are just so good at it, he'd be like, yeah, I don't like it. But as a hitter, he'd be sitting there going like, no, it does give me some sort of structure, I'd assume. And then that's where it's a very difficult thing to produce new rules, just because you can't please everyone. And there's always going to be people who disagree and agree. So it's really, what is the net positive? And for me, the net positive comes with the concept that you're able to add a little bit of a challenge to the umpire that you didn't get to before. I couldn't, if I was to question an umpire in the past, he'd just tell me to go back to the dugout. Now I am empowered to be, I have a choice to do it respectfully and go like, I think you're wrong. Let's see if I'm right. So that's where I think as a baseball player, it's actually quite beneficial.
All right, moving on. You recently left Momentum. So can you tell us about what went into that decision and a little bit about your role now with the Spokane Indians, the Rockies affiliate?
Sure. The biggest thing for me was my family. I have 3 young children. I have 2-year-old daughters and a 10-month-old son. And it's the entrepreneur lifestyle and the things that I was having to do in Arizona was very difficult on me, my family, and my wife. So we always discussed where's home. And Spokane was always home. That's where we got married. That's where we've always wanted to retire. So it was a difficult decision, but it was one that was made in order to help my family plant roots, make sure we develop, and go from there. And now in my new role, I'm the director of corporate partnerships here, which allows me to be very involved in the community, which is something that's very important to me. It allows me to engage through the game of baseball. That's something that, the last 10, 12 years, I've been very involved with the game. And I think I've learned a lot about how it can be positive, how it can be negative, how there's a lot of different ways, you can bring impact to people's lives. And to be able to try and do that here in Spokane is something I was very excited about. So when the opportunity arose to do that in a town that means as much as Spokane does to me and my family, in the capacity that it was something that I was very interested in. So that's where there's a very cordial parting of ways. The last 4 or 5 years of building momentum is some of the most enjoyable times. Getting to do something super impactful with my friends was something I always wanted to do. And I believe we were very much able to do that. So we left it in a good place. And that's really the extent of the move.
Well, next question I've written down here is where do you see yourself going with this new chapter of your career? But you mentioned that this is where you see yourself retiring. So does that mean that?
From a city standpoint, I mean, this is the nice part about being in the Northwest. You have the capacity to really be. I love the area of Spokane, and this inland Northwest area means a lot to us. So I'd love to do whatever I can to help build the Spokane Indians into the team that I believe it can be, and they've already shown how awesome this organization is. So to be honest, it is one of those things where you try to just keep, you have your dreams and then you also have your feet on the ground. So I know day over day, I'm paying attention to the things I need to do while also paying attention to the landscape of, where the game's going. I explained that I've developed a pretty robust understanding of the game of baseball, the business side, the player development side, the entertainment side. So as those skills and time goes on, you never know what life brings you. I just know right now my number one goal is to help the Spokane Indians grow and evolve into the best minor league baseball team possible.
So you touched on making Spokane the team that they can be. As a minor league baseball team, how much of these moves and different transactions are actually up to your team, and how much of it comes from kind of like the greater organization or the people in the front office by the major league team?
Yep. We have zero control over any sort of player development, player management. What we do is focus on the entertainment and the execution of the product here in Spokane. So the Colorado Rockies are our affiliate. They make all roster decisions. It is their employees that are the ones on the field. It is their employees managing the decisions on the field. It is our job to provide the greatest jerseys, fan experience, stadium, amenities that we can to help support them throughout their season, which admittedly is a novel thing for me. When I've been involved in baseball, I was involved in the player development side and I was involved in the entertainment side. So those are two very involved things on the field. Now my job right now is to focus on providing the best overall experience for players when they are in Spokane during their stint here. So the short answer is we have no involvement in those decisions at all.
Do you see yourself at some point in the future working with the front office of a major league team and actually making said decisions? Is that something that interests you?
Sure. I mean, it's the thing. It's In my personal experience, it's never the title, it's the people you work with that matters the most. And that's very much where, when the opportunity presented itself here for Spokane, I have the opportunity to work with a lot of great people who know how to impact a community, who know how to make a team very successful and the business of the team very successful. And I think I have a lot of friends on the player development side. I have a lot of friends throughout baseball. And if it ever came a time where that opportunity was something that was worth it and, something that was, I think it was the right time. It's all, you'll see, as in life, it's all about timing and opportunities and whether or not it's the right kind of option for you for that specific piece of time. So I'll never say no. I just know that right now my main focus is everything here in Spokane.
All right. With what the people up in the front office in Los Angeles, the Dodgers, have been doing over the past couple offseason, there's been a couple of rumors, couple of whispers about maybe a salary cap, a salary floor. Do you think that would be good for the game of baseball? And why?
I understand it from both sides. I think what the Dodgers have done over the last few years is actually very strong for the game. And I think it's something that makes people have to take a strong look in the mirror to be like, we are just as much of a professional baseball team as they are. Obviously, they have a lot of financial backing. There's a lot of different things that they've strategically done over the last 20, 30 years to put themselves in a strong position. So the salary cap, it's been something that people have put in place to level the playing field in some capacity. I'm a big fan of strategy. I'm a big fan of general creativity and innovation. And I think you can never state that the Dodgers lack in that department. So I find it very difficult to try to find ways to hinder that. I do think a salary cap produces new versions of innovation and ingenuity. But I do think that those who are afraid to spend money get stuck in that area of being afraid to spend money, where those who aren't, they took just as many risks as many others and they've been able to pay it off. So I don't have a strong answer for you on that one. To be honest, I don't know if it would be good for the game, but I think it's obviously a piece of the conversation and it's something that they need to consider. But I also don't think that anything the Dodgers have been doing to put themselves in such a prime position is wrong. I think it's just people who have the means and the ability to really produce a great team, and that's what they've been doing.
So as a Yankees fan for the past 15, 20 years, I can tell you firsthand that spending big money doesn't necessarily mean you're going to win a championship. However, I am a big fan of a salary floor because if we look at,
Yes.
let's circle back to what we discussed earlier. Let's say Paul Skeens, for example, he could be a huge part of the game, really advance the game of baseball. However, not as many people know of him, or he isn't as big as he could be because he plays for a team that just doesn't spend money. There's so many other guys. You have what the duo in Colorado's big leagues are doing right now. You have so many teams that just won't spend money. And I think that forcing them to spend money, obviously, I can't say that as a kid who isn't spending a penny. I can't tell people that they got to spend money. But I would think that a salary floor would make the league much more competitive and would help give players like Paul Skeens a much larger stage. Also, guys like all the exciting players over in Baltimore, we're probably not going to see them go be a World Series contending team every year because their management just isn't spending the money that they need to.
And the business person in me understands it's difficult running a team. You saw how some were able to manage it in COVID and somehow some weren't. You've seen it with the A's. You've seen it with the Mariners. There's lots of different fan bases that are upset with their ownership. But when it comes down to it, it is a numbers game, and that's what allows you to have a team. And so I don't disagree. I think a salary floor was actually very strong. It's just it'll take a lot to get one. And I think it's the commissioner represents the owners in many capacities. That's really what his job is to do, and it's for the best interest of the owners. And I think there's some changes that are probably coming within the next few years that'll put an even ground in, because there is a lot of pushback. So I don't disagree. I think the concept of a salary floor is very strong. And so hopefully something like that might occur that would help level the playing field and at least boost the, all you want to do is provide opportunities to the game's biggest stars so that they can be playing in October and they can be
Okay.
having the ability, I hope Julio Rodriguez has a chance to win a World Series. I do. I don't know if he can do it in Seattle. I don't know. But there are a lot of things like that where it's the core group of guys that the Orioles have. Are they going to be able to keep them all together? So it's a lot of those things that become difficult.
All right. So last question before we wrap it up.
Sure.
Funny question. Can you tell us about the funniest off-camera King of Juco moment you've witnessed?
No, but I can tell you something. No, I mean it's that's a very special relationship that I've been able to know Eric for a really long time, and when it comes down to it, to be able to see the type of impact he's been able to create and see who he's developed into as a father, as a husband, it is very nice to see as a friend. So moments wise, they're all, the thing is that's him, and all the ones that you see, that's not put on. That's just organically who he is and authentically who he is. So there's been some really good ones, certain chairs breaking when he makes a joke about himself. That's like, it's just very timely. There's, you could imagine that there's plenty of things that happen behind camera that are pretty fun. But to be honest, there's been just as many moments on camera that are just as funny. So really, that's how I feel about it. Yeah.
Yeah, the Yankees want to replace that lefty pop in front of Aaron Judge. They're going to have to sign Aaron Fudge. All right.
Yep.
Thank you so much for taking the time.